I am just so beat with the whole process of making this review. What's up, everybody? This is Willie, and we're back talking about Rubble Crew, reviewing the latest season that just finished season 3, which this season as a whole was mostly a follow-up to season 2, and the sound of that is not great since season 2 is primarily an unnotable season, and this one unfortunately retreads most of what was induced in the second season, with the constant just simplistic storylines that are mostly bland and rudimentary for the most part, that generally just has everything so foreshown what's gonna happen that reduces any of my interest throughout an episode, and theoretically that's just the tropes of what Rubble Crew is going to grasp on, as I don't have much faith that this show is really going to offer any sort of contemporary resonance or any sort of shtick that would elicit some vocalization, and sadly it fails to comprehend in those tropes. Though with all that said, I do think the show on this season did at least try to basically upscale its quality, where I think is a tad better than season 2, and it did introduce a sub-series where they're basically following the tropes of the main franchise with this shtick, where this season introduced us the sub-series Big Bills, and I'll share more of my thoughts on it on the review, but this aspect was sort of like the show's being self-aware of their mid-quality and trying to enhance it with that kind of branding. But either way, even though this season is a step above the last one, the execution though is still not enough to really reach that upper echelon as a modern kids show. But likewise, for my traditional reviews, I'll critically review each episode and share my thoughts and opinions on them along the way, and at the end I'm gonna rate which episode is the best and worst from this season. So enough said, let's get straight into it. So let's start off with episode 1, where the crew builds a vet clinic, and we have the pups basically building, I believe, a bike rack at the city hall, and then they encounter the mouse family that Charger and Rubble dealt with back in season 1. And just then, we are introduced to a new character who arrives in Builder's Cove, known as Dr. Diwa, who arrives at the city hall traveling on a cool scooter, and this is where she has an appointment with the mouse, basically acting like one towards them. But then that's when she has to make her way to her next patient, which is Crunchy the Beaver. So she departs to check on him while the pups stay behind to finish up their build, and she meets up with Crunchy, whose teeth is dirty, so she goes ahead and polishes it nicely before having to make her way to her next patient, which is Maureen the cow at the farm. And then after that is Wingsy the eagle, which after all this traveling around to meet her patients, she's just exhausted, where she so happens to pass by them as they witness her in the state that she's in, and then that gives them the idea that they should build a vet clinic for her, which is like, that's what it should have been to begin with, so she wouldn't have to do this job going in circles. So the pups build the darn thing, and for some reason they gather all of Dr. Diwa's animal patients inside before they brought her in. And what do you know? Those animals teared up the place, which the pups should have known, but I guess they didn't. However, now the pups have an idea that they should probably build something that accommodates for each animal, so it would shape their behaviors a lot more normally. So they get on crane to deliver more materials to them, and the pups construct all the accommodated spaces they need that suits for each animal that would be a patient at the clinic. So the animals come in and they actually enjoy themselves in their designated spaces, which finally allows Diwa to take care of them more firmly, and she is appreciated for the pups' assistance, and that summarizes everything for this episode, which was just fine. Yeah, what a start to the season that was. So now I'll continue to the following episode, where the crew builds a mermaid party for Lily because it is her birthday this episode. So what better way than to celebrate it at a beach, where the pups are setting up the party stuff there, with a lot of mermaid themes surrounding it, especially a sand sculpture that depicts a mermaid. So then Juniper arrives to check out the work the pups done before she leaves to get her daughter. And by then you can see the climate start to change, with the clouds turning really gray. And what do you know? It drizzles, with raindrops start pouring, effectively ruining everything at the party. And that is not helped by the fact that Lily arrives just to see the unfortunate sight of this mess, which is an awful feeling, especially how much excitement she was expressing. But of course, these pups always have a solution, and their solution is to just move the party to the outdoor gym, which, okay, cool callback. Also, I guess Lily's epic moment took place at that gym when she faced her fear of heights, so that's pretty apt. So they bring all the party materials to the gym, and also set them some other decorations too. As well as we get this funny visual of Rubble and Charger relaxing on the beach chair, only for both of them to lean back too much, causing them to fall back. So everything is pretty much done, but they need one last touch to truly embody the mermaid theme. And considering there was actually a mermaid costume for Lily to wear only for it to be soaked, the pups come up with an alternative solution of creating creating a clam throne instead, with a mermaid tail sitting inside alongside a pearl. So they get all of that complete, and the pups create a mermaid tail kite to signal Lily's family to come over to the gym, and she's given the wonderful surprise with her mermaid party. Which, what do you know, rain starts to drop again, but thanks to the covering, the party is saved this time. So everyone celebrates Lily's birthday party alongside her sitting on the clam throne to truly embrace herself, and that is the end. So anyways, our next episode is titled The Crew Builds a Hotel Elevator. And this is where I would follow up with what I said in the Season 2 review in regards to the hotel episode not getting to showcase us what a building offered. So it's great that this episode really gave us a proper follow-up to it. So at least there is some connective tissue there. But anyways, we have the pups and most of the citizens just spending time at the amusement park. But then the climate changes and it just snows. Just like that. And to add more to the expense, I guess the snow has prevented everyone to return back to their homes. So that doesn't look great. However, the pups memorized about the hotel they built not too long ago and decided for everyone to stay there for the time being. So everyone present arrives inside the hotel where they meet with Hadley and each check themselves in their respective rooms, which because how big the hotel is, it's in a variety of rooms that are on different levels. And since the pups do opt to administer each guest, they are pretty worn out by the amount of stairs that they have to climb up and down for. Which Wheeler is right, there is a lot of stairs, as he and his cousins just lay there and exhausted by all the work. And as they're trying to figure out a solution to this, Charger comes stumbling down and slides by them, which gave them an idea that they could just build slides. Which that is a good solution on paper, but the problem is that's only one-sided because that's only for when you're going down. And yes, I mean you still can use the stairs to go up, but I will say that there are a lot more quicker ways to getting up as well. But yeah, the pups do build those slides for each floor, and the design does come off a bit wonky because consider each slide connects with every floor. They do intersect with one slide that leads to the bottom. And although I don't mind the concept of slides, I will say there was some oversight from the pups here, not knowing that there could be risks of collision or accidental mingling if someone were to slide and collide into another person. Like, I don't think that was really thought out. And if you were watching this as a child, you wouldn't notice that. But for me, as a grown adult, watching this and observing everything about the design, there is a lot of flaws that I think were overlooked. But anyways, the slides are complete and the pups have no trouble with it. And Grandpa Gravel arrives with some soups to give to the guests, so the pups opt to deliver it. And this is where I mentioned that they should have thought out another way of getting up, since there's a lot of friction when going up steps, especially carrying stuff that needs to be well balanced. And because that lost a lot of balance, the soup liquid starts spilling out. And by the time the pups arrive to deliver the soup, the bowls are empty. So the pups gather around to figure out another solution, which I mean, in a building where you need to go up and down, I think it's fairly obvious what you need to do, which is build an elevator. And to make it more fancy, they decide to construct the elevator by designing it like a rocket ship. So they get the elevator completed and are able to smoothly deliver the soup to the guests. And they decide to have some fun sliding back down the slides and riding up the elevator again to do the same thing. So that concludes the episode right there, and I did have a lot more enjoyment from this episode, mainly because there was at least a lot more going on with the whole conflicts and stuff. But there was a lot of rumblings of nitpicks that I had to make with some of the ideas and solutions that the pups came up with that I don't think were thought out thoroughly. Although the show does not emphasize any of that, I can at least make my critics and deduce some of the issues that I know are possible based on real life circumstances. So anyways, to the following episode where it is about the pups building a popcorn cafe themed around cats. And considering we haven't really properly had a cat involved in this show, I think I know where it is going with this episode. So anyways, it begins with them at Carl's Popcorn Cafe where they meet Carl's newly adopted kittens who just jump out on the pups and play around with them, which the pups are enjoying. But then we get the downside of having kittens, especially bringing them to work, as we see them causing a ruckus around the cafe, knocking over popcorns, especially for Carl's customers, which is ruining the experience for them. So the pups try to help by constructing some activities that they assume the cats would enjoy playing in, but unfortunately none of the activities appease those cats and they continue to cause a mess around the cafe. So the next idea that they have is to call over Dr. Diwa, who arrives and is able to get all the kittens to tone down themselves, and they all find a way inside a pipe to sleep inside, which is good, but that's only going to be temporary. So there still needs to be a solution to rectify all of this, and that's when the idea is to make a play space designated for cats. So the pups end up making it, and when they do, the cats are awakened and they check the play space out, and we once again get the over dramatic suspense of the characters checking out the pups build before they express their approval on it, which I mean, I don't really recall properly exactly how I feel about this moment, but they do come off a bit cringy as it's pretty clear what the answer is going to be, and it does come off a bit shoehorned just to add more suspense when it is completely unnecessary. unnecessary. And the fact that we didn't have that in season 2 made me think that, oh, they've dropped that sort of segment. That was a good call on their part, but no, they ended up bringing it back. Which, I mean, it is only good for like some callbacks, but definitely not the callback that I would give an excuse of bringing back. But anyways, the cats are happy with what they have, and the pups finish up the job by adding a little cat detail on the fake popcorn on the building. So that was at least a good touch there, and that is it. It's just fine. I mean, nice for Carl to adopt some cats, but still not an episode that would resonate with me in the grand scheme of things. So anyways, the next episode is another 24-minute single episode, which, okay, I mean, the episode as a whole didn't even feel like anything special, but I guess with the narrative of the episode, they decided to prolong it a bit more. So here we are, and it begins with the pups waking up and then getting a call from the tower, which while they make their way there, the tower begins to rise, and now comes a lift that is carrying a fancy vehicle, which is operated by Auntie, who she describes her zoomer, which is basically a vehicle that embodies all of the construction necessities in one, which is pretty cool. But after that, the pups make their way up the tower because the call is still going, and when they finally connect, it's from Rose, who is in front of the bears from the Bear Island, where she needs the pups' help to fix the bridge, which happened to have broken apart. So the crew make their way there, and while they're passing by, they pass by Speedmeister, who is happening to serve drinks in his terrible lemonade stand. Wow, that darn thing is still standing, but yeah, he gets word of what the pups are doing, so he tries to intervene, and he arrives at the bridge before the pups can, and he starts pouring concrete all over it, which is dumb and also really incompetent on him for not even understanding the science there, and especially on top of the fact that he has pickles in the concrete too, which is just weird. But basically he poured too much concrete, which solidified quickly, and because it was on top of the wooden planks, which some of them are broken and are not strong enough to carry the weight, they just break underneath the weight of the concrete, which now the bridge has been completely destroyed. Thanks, Speedmeister. And he just stays on the sideline like a freaking coward he is. But the pups are able to rebuild the bridge, and when they do, Rose tries to lead the bears out, but the bears only stop moving when they reach the start of the bridge, which does lead to a lot of question marks, like why? Until they see the climate starting to change, which a storm is incoming, and because of the storm, will have a lot of effects on the sea that's surrounding the island, which is obviously not great for the bears, so there has to be another construction solution for this, and that's where they have the idea of the seawall. But there is some more complicated procedures when making one, considering they're going to have to make it in the middle of the sea. To which the pups realize that they could trial Crane's new zoomer, so they call her over, and she arrives in the zoomer, and when Speedmeister looks at it, it inspires him an idea of what he can try and create. But anyways, with the help of the new zoomer, it's able to get the pups to smoothly construct the seawall on the water surface, and after some construction and paintwork, it is complete. And as the storm is brewing, causing the waves to shift over, the pups are ready to test the sea wall, but of course, Speedmeister always has to try and do something, and what he does is against his best interest, and what do you know? He ends up getting his vehicle stuck onto the seawall, which is just seconds before the seawater makes in contact with it, so the pups quickly use the zoomer to rescue Speedmeister off the seawall just as the water splashed onto it, which the wall is able to block off, so with that, the pups' work was a success. So after that, the storm clears up and the bears are able to come out of their hiding and enjoy their day in the outdoors again, which everyone is delighted by. But then, before the episode ends, we have to have Speedmeister one last time chime in, being a show-off he is, and we see that he tried to copy the idea of the zoomer with his vehicle, which is basically him compiling trash that resembles the vehicle, and it just falls apart. And to make him much of a bigger jerk, he just has to start taking selfies of him in front of the actual zoomer, like he's some hero. Like, no, you're just a zero for brain cell skills and everything else. But anyways, that does end off the episode. The crew builds a seawall, which was just another one that's just decent, but not anything really significant to a degree outside of just the introduction of Auntie's new vehicle. And just your average episode that pertains to the generic storyline of Speedmeister trying to chip in only for him to demonstrate his incompetence as far as he can. Jumping forward to the crew builds a mega-sized screen, which is another Super Squirrel related episode, so that means we're getting a lot more focus between Motor and Mix once again. And it begins with them in their superhero suits, because always. But yeah, there's Stopia. There's a new movie relating to Super Squirrel that's premiering, and it is going to be projected on the drive-in theater, so them and the rest of the pups are getting ready to watch it alongside many citizens, and among them is Speedmeister, who might as well be as sadistic as always, with so much things up its sleeve, but this one definitely is the most mindless. And we see here when the movie is premiering, I guess Speedmeister went all in to have it all for himself, and he uses one of those lifts to elevate his vehicle, which his P-Brain couldn't even just do it at the back of the audience. He had to do it in front of them, blocking a lot of people's views like an impulsive freak he is. And obviously, because of how incompetent his builds are, the lift he uses is not stable and it gets wobbly, which causes him and McTurtle to crash into the feeder screen, destroying it in the process. And now people can't watch the movie. Thanks a lot, you bonehead. So back to the main point, Speedmeister and McTurtle are now stuck hanging on to the ledge of the feeder frame, so which a rescue mission is needed, which is very apt with Mix and Motor, who easily just grab one of the banners to use as like a safety net, and they are able to save Speedmeister and McTurtle's fall. So props to them. But after that, the screen recoils and collapses on the ground, rendering it completely damaged. And what do you know, we have Speedmeister try to peep him, giving his short apology before following up with, he never made a lot of mistakes in his life until now, which, shut the hell up!
It's just not realistic.
But anyways, a construction solution is needed, and guess what? It's just rebuilding the screen, but expanding its size more so. That way no one has to act as selfish like Speedmeister in trying to hog it up for themselves. So with the help of On Crane bringing over her zoomer, they're able to construct a much bigger framework for the supersized screen, and they're complete. Now everyone can continue watching the premiere of the new Squirrely Whirly movie, which because of how enormous the screen is, even citizens who couldn't even make it to the drive-in theater can watch it from home. So there's a little hack in the system there too. But yeah, that pretty much concludes the episode there, and it's just another one that's fine for me. But you can tell from my voice how overtly I was annoyed with Speedmeister this episode. Like, the kind of character he is just so wonky, where certain times he has some redeeming qualities to him, but then another time he just regresses from that and makes him pretty much come off as a do-gooder in the spots that he actually did good things. Like, for me, those are the character archetypes that I'm just not a fond of, and I feel like this episode might have epitomized why that's the case, where I have a huge disliking for his character. So for our next episode, which is another special day to celebrate, which is Auntie Day, and considering Crane is the pup's aunt, they are planning on making something to celebrate the day for her. So while they're planning, Motor, who is Crane's daughter, keeps her occupied with her looking for her rubber duck, and then plan on bringing her along for an adventure. And when the pups head inside their home to try and figure out a present, they're suddenly given a surprise by Aunt Crane, who does try to get a peep of what they're doing, and we humorously have them struggling to even find the right words to say. But ultimately, she does leave with Motor to the duck pond, where they occupy their time there, giving the pups enough time to start the foundation of their present, which they finally have an idea that they could make a portrait painting of all their faces. So they get around to setting up the framework for the portrait, and they get the canvas ready for Mix to paint all their faces. However, as always, they're challenged with something wildly unexpected in the fact that Mix runs out of paint just short of painting all the remaining pups and their faces. So that's unfortunate. However, like the usual, Charger indirectly finds a solution. This time when he knocks over some some materials, combining them together makes a face, and that inspires the pups the idea that they could probably just use some of their materials to make the faces on the canvas. So they implement that strategy, and they finally complete the portrait just as Aunt Crane returns to the barkyard, where she makes the discovery of the portrait hanging on the top of the tower, which she is astonished by and feels delighted with what the kids made. You know, on top of her celebration, her father, Grandpa Gravel, baked some good treats for them to enjoy on as well. So that was definitely one special day for Aunt Crane, and that concludes the episode right there. So my opinions on this episode, it's around the same ballpark with most of the given episodes this season, being just decent and fine, in conjunction with its lack of notability as well. Like, I felt like this episode was just that, you know, typical celebration episode for a parental figure, and considering Grandpa Gravel already got one for the Grandparents' Day episode, it is fitting to have Aunt Crane get one for Auntie Day. So then for our next episode, we have River trying to take a picture of the pups who are just staring at each other before they fall down together, which was pretty apt. But basically, there's a photo contest, and River is trying to win by taking a lot of pictures around Builder's Cove. So they need to go around place to place to get some photographs of like citizens and stuff. But that proves to be an issue, which I don't know why there's no source of transportation, or like why can't River like ride in a car or something, but whatever. They skateboard their ways to many places, notably Gabrielle's shop, where they take a picture of Gabrielle only for the sunlight to ruin the photograph. So then they go to City Hall and take a photo of the mayor and her duck. So there's that, but the sun is starting to dawn a bit, and there's still a lot more people that River needs to photograph. So that's a lot of pressure right there. But because they're with the pups, there's always a construction solution, which is basically building a humongous skate track all around the town, which I'm surprised they had a lot of time making it than River just going to place. But yeah, by the time they're done, it's already dawn. So River quickly rides their skateboard on the skate track and is able to take many photographs of citizens who are waiting for them, and they get everyone that they plan to take, which felt like the skate track felt so monorail coded with how quick River went through it. But anyways, got all the photos they need, edited together and sent for the photo contest, and next thing you know, it is nice, and Inez gathers everyone around to announce the winner of that little contest, and unsurprisingly, River wins. So they celebrate with the pups, taking some selfies. So what are my final thoughts on this episode? It's just an episode that didn't really do much for me, but I think it was fine. Like for me, the only issues I have with these latest episodes is the fact that they just don't really have such significance to make me resonate with them at all. Like in a test of time, this episode would probably just fade from my memory, which is very unfortunate, but that is indeed the case here. So with that, let's just jump right into the next episode that I got a review on. And that next episode is titled The Crew Builds a Giant Ice Cream Maker, where we have the pups meeting up with Carl at his ice cream shop, and he showcases to them his small ice cream maker where he's making strawberry ice cream, which as always when it comes to Rubble, he feels in heaven with the thought of food, because that's Rubble for you. But there comes an issue. There's a lot of customers waiting to get this ice cream, and considering how much work Carl has to do to make the ice cream, boy, that's gonna take like forever. So of course the construction solution here is to just make a bigger, like giant ice cream maker. So as the pups are making one, the Meister, like the usual, is spying on them and opts to try and take over, which is essentially making his own stand, which is always going to be banned, while serving his own ice cream, which looks very fungus. But yeah, and of course, in order to make sure that he's the only one that's going to serve people, he needs to sabotage the pups in some ways. So as the pups finish building the giant ice cream maker, they're about to get things settled, only for them to get distracted by McTurtle trying to do a magic trick for them, while Speedmeister begins pouring concrete inside the machine, effectively rendering it to be useless after the concrete hardens, and the pups do discover what just happened, which is obviously disappointing. But there can be alternatives made, and what do you know, their alternative is just using Mix's mixer. Like that was not too obvious. So they pour all the ingredients inside there, and after some mixing, it creates the ice cream, so everyone is able to have some, including McTurtle, who was trying some ice cream Lily was giving to him, and I guess Speedmeister decided to join in as well. So it wraps up there, but I just found myself radically okay with the episode, but I felt just more lenient on the storyline with Speedmeister once again just sabotaging the pups as always. Like, I mean, at least I was less annoyed with him than the Super Size Screen episode, but still not like there's any sort of good qualities in his character this episode as well, with how much he was sabotaging the pups project just in favor for his, only for everyone to just reject him. Like, this guy never knows how to read the room right and recognize his own flaws, and even then he never learns from the pups on how to adjust. So that's essentially another aspect of his errors, and he just fails to be aware of them. All that pretty much sums up Speedmeister this episode, and there's really nothing else I can gauge off of it. Well, for our next episode, we have the crew working with Speedmeister this episode. What a turn of events that was. But to start off, the pups wake up to see a crane tower made of treats. And just as the pups are about to dig into it, Rubble has to stop them and showcase that they need to grab one treat from the structure without collapsing it, which is just like Jenga. So Rubble goes first, and he's fine. Then Wheeler and Mix simultaneously grab one together, but then we have Charger who demolishes it because he gets way too energetic. But anyways, they decide to feast on it. So I guess that wasn't really relevant too much. But anyways, we got to Speedmeister and McTurtle spending their time at the park. For once, he's not trying to cause crap like he does. But then the pups encounter him as they're passing by the park eating some ice cream. But then after that, with that day being Friendship Day, and Speedmeister having such a strong friendship with McTurtle, he decides he wants to build a surprise gift for McTurtle. And what do you know, he built a big house around McTurtle, and it's definitely one that exceeded his heights. But we all know Speedmeister, and what he values is absolute crap with his build. And what do you know? The result is disastrous as always, where firstly, his P-Brain didn't even check what he put in the interior, where it was completely full of bricks, meaning there was no way McTurtle was going to make his way out of the exit because the whole interior is bricked up, so he's just seeing walls. And two, the house was built way too big, where it was so unbalanced and lopsided, where one mistake can cause havoc. And we see here when Speedmeister removes one of the planks that somehow is holding up the entire house, it begins to wobble, indicating signs of collapse. And considering McTurtle is inside, that is very unsafe. so that forces Speedmeister to put the blank back. And with no other option, considering how dumb he is, he calls the pups for help. So they come over and learn of the disastrous situation Speedmeister has caused. And by the description of the wobbly building, where if you take the wrong piece, it might come down, it quickly reminds the pups about the stack of treats earlier that they played like Jenga, which this situation is a Jenga-like situation where you have to really micromanage your strategies and analyze which is the right piece to remove to reduce the possibility of collapse. So the pups work that out well, and they are able to remove enough pieces to free McTurtle, which Speedmeister is delighted by. However, the pups also opt to help Speedmeister at least construct something for McTurtle, so the idea is to build a giant house that is turtle-shaped, which is definitely more suited for McTurtle. And so they call over on Crane to bring over the zoomer, and it contributes to building the foundation and framework of the structure before the final touches are added on it. And when it's complete, there's one more add-on to make, which Speedmeister opts to put the nail on. But of course, he hammers it in sloppily, but it didn't matter because the nail was there to hang a nice little portrait drawing of McTurtle and himself. So that is what the episode is, and it was just okay. It did feel a bit of a different vibe here with Speedmeister because he's normally the one sabotaging the pups. This time he's actually working with them to make his building, but which, to be fair, is only lent by that because of the circumstances that he couldn't even build a proper house himself. So our next episode after that is the crew builds a giant volcano, and our setting takes place at the museum with some nice callback to the Colorful Crystals episode, but the pups are getting things set up for a science fair event that's going to take place there, and they're met with Rose and then Lily and Lucas, who are showcasing some of their projects, with Lily's being a mini shining crystal that emits rays when light is flashed on it, while for Lucas, his project is a tiny volcano that erupts orange bubbles. Okay, but then things go awry because I guess Lucas didn't realize when he tested his volcano project, it's only going to be able to function for the one time it was activated, and we see here it deflates just like that, which upsets him. But the pups conceived the idea that they could just make a giant version of the volcano and bring it up to the roof, thanks to the sight of Wingsy just sitting there, which I wonder what role she's going to have in this episode. But once again, the pups call over on Crane to bring the zoomer, and with the help of that, alongside her construction methods, as always, they complete the build. And this giant volcano also includes a scale that will register the level the eruption has reached to. But to top everything off, Mick spray paints the volcano in the special purple sparkle, which is like the one in the hiking trail episode. And with Wingsy's presence being apparent, it's pretty clear where this is gonna go as the crew gets the volcano up onto the roof of the museum, and when they're activating it in the middle of its process, that's when Wingsy makes her way to sit inside of the volcano, which is obviously bad, but Wingsy is attracted to sparkly purple, and everyone knows that she has a sparkly purple nest, which is way far away in the distance at the mountains, so there needs to be some way to get her eye attracted to that. And guess what? Thanks to the visual of Lily's project that she showcased earlier with the reflected lights, they're able to use some bigger shining crystals to reflect the light, which one of the light rays do shine on the nest, which does grab Wingsy's attention, and she makes her way off the volcano just as it erupts, and lots of bubbles come shooting out of it. But yeah, Lucas's project was a success and everyone celebrates. So that is the episode, and I'm just fine with it. You know, anything involving Wingsy obviously is going to lead to something bad, because I guess this show has no other way to really represent these characters in less of a troublesome way. But hey, we got some cool visuals in this episode too, with the projects from both Lucas and Lily. Like, their works were pretty cool. So our next episode is another fire station related episode once again, but this time it's not involving Marshall, so definitely a different sort of feeling here. But it begins with them at Carl's Popcorn Cafe fixing up a sidewalk. Meanwhile, one of the cats made its way on top of a tree, so Motor is the one to rescue it with her wrecking ball, where she's relishing her fire captain volunteer role, because remember, back in season 1's episode, Marshall elected her to be volunteer captain. So I guess they brought back that storyline here, and she really was embracing it. But she's also a construction pup at the same time. And when the pups are met with Mayor Greatway, who brings them to the fire station, that's when there's a new person coming into town, and he's a fire captain named Katawi, who obviously opt to help out the pups and also train them. So as construction pups, they need to build a training center, and they call over on Crane to bring over the zoomer, and therefore they construct a training center involving a fire pole, which, I mean, we already have one in the fire station, but I guess sometimes things are worth doubling. But they also have other techniques like a safety net and also a bell. And during the whole building process, we are back with Carl and his cat. And things go pretty haywire. First and foremost, Carl, somehow carelessly not checking his kitchen, is burning something, which smoke starts to come out. And then his cats all separate from him and eventually make their way somehow onto the top of the popcorn cafe. Wow. So that's when Carl has to call the pups and Katawi to inform them about the news. And this is the opportunity for the pups to really put their training to the test. So they all together ring the bell and then make their way to the popcorn cafe, where they first deal with rescuing the cats, and their method was what they tried out earlier with the safety net, and that works out elegantly. So then the next step is to simple extinguish the fire by just using the hose, and what do you know, it works easily just like that. So the pup's job here is done, and Carl is thankful for it, which is followed up with a bubbly moment of both Katari and Wheeler saying the same thing at the same time and realizing it, which I guess jinx. But anyways, they return back to the fire station and Katari expresses his appreciation for the pup's efforts, and that's where it ends off. So it's just an episode that's just more of the same with the season, with a pretty middle of the road storylines. But hey, at least this episode did try, and I do like episodes that revisit a storyline from a previous episode to really give some nice direct connection, or let's just say follow-up to it. After that, the next episode is titled The Crew Builds a Space Show associated with Sierra Sparkle's show, so that'll be interesting. And of course, when you hear Sierra Sparkle, that gives such an appeal to Charger, who is her biggest fan. And so, cutting to the episode, it starts off with the pups just scrubbing the tower, and then next thing you know, Sierra Sparkle makes her way to the barkyard, where Charger obviously gets excited, especially when she offers him the position to help her with her upcoming show that night, which pumps him up even better. So then when she leaves, he is just very exuberant about what's to come, that he gets a bit too energetic about it to the point where it causes him to trip and injure his paw in the process. And while he does try to claim that he's okay, he occasionally keeps on licking it, which seems to be worsening the paw every time he does so. So the pups take him to Dr. Diwa, and after she checks him out, she does deduce that the paw will heal quicker, but he needs to stop licking it, and to avoid him from licking it any further, Charger has no choice but to wear the cone of shame. Basically, you know, the dog cone that is put around the dog's head, which Charger is saddened by the reality that he now has to look like this for the upcoming concert. And when he spots Sierra and her dad putting up some posters, he is too embarrassed to show himself to her like that, so he quickly dashes around the corner to hide, which his cousins follow him and try to find ways for him to adjust to the situation. And it's only when Wheeler opens a book about aliens that the helmets that they were depicted to wear is something that Charger inside the cone is resembling. So the pups get the idea that they could paint some space related stuff on his cone, so they go forward with that plan. And after that, Charger makes his way out and sees Sierra, who is astonished by his new look and believes the space theme is perfect for her upcoming show that night. But Wheeler points out the sun is almost down, so the pups need to quickly make their way to the top of the mountain to set up the space show themed concert, and with the help of on-crane zoomer, they are able to complete the build to the delight of Sierra and Gabrielle. So now the citizens and pups enjoy Sierra's concert, with Charger being able to glide around through the audience and the stage. So that's definitely one great moment that he's gonna cherish from this concert. But yeah, this episode was just okay for the most part. So then we go over to this episode where a duck plane is made. Sure, but anyways, it begins with, I guess, a day about ducks being set up, where the pups and some citizens are gathered around to watch the screening of a film about just ducks. Then a flock of real ducks proceed to settle themselves in the little pond that's right behind the screen, which everyone notices, and Rose points out the issues that they essentially went off course, as they're supposed to continue the way they went, which is heading south to migrate, as winter is right around the corner, which no crap it is. And that is not helped with the ducks essentially now settling themselves in the town's environment, which meant that they're going to be exposed to the chilly season that they're trying to migrate from. So Motor, the duck enthusiast, tries to lead the duck away. Just the problem here is that she can't fly, so even if she is guiding them, she's not going to be able to guide them in the air, so she stays grounded. Next up, the pups try to execute a method of crafting a kite with a duck iconography on it to try leading them away. So it's attached to Rubble's truck as he glides it up high in the air, which catches the attention of the ducks who follow it. And his plan does stick for a good chunk of the time. Then something turns on its head when the kite gets caught on the tree, which I guess embodies itself like a pinpoint to the ducks that seemingly speaks to them that they can settle themselves in Builder's Cove, which no, because now you're making the town go in shambles. Which honestly, the town was very inefficient to begin with. But okay, now the pups need a new solution to fix this chaotic scrambling. And thanks a lot, Charger. Your mouth is always the biggest resource. And this time is thanks to his observation of Camilla's plane that offers the idea that the pups could make a plane that is designed like a duck, so it can guide the ducks away. So they go to the airport to essentially ask for Camilla's approval of basically giving her plane a new look. And likewise, she gives them her consent and they do some decoration to make her plane resemble like a duck, particularly like Mr. Ducky was present there for, I guess, some reference. But anyways, on top of this aesthetical change, there was also an added on sound system that makes the quack sounds because they had to go a bit steps ahead. So anyways, on top of this, Motor gets to sit in the co-pilot seat next to Camilla as they take off in the duck plane. And thanks to its special sound effects and aesthetical looks, it attracts the ducks to follow it and migrate from the Builder's Cove. So mission complete. And they have Mr. Ducky lead them for the celebratory routine they have, which they end up doing the duck walk.
No! God, please, no!
No, that visual of the pups doing it is so cringy. But anyways, they get a call from Camilla, who has landed the ducks at a very warm resort where she and Motor are relaxing with them too. So good enough. But now to talk about my thoughts on this episode. To me, it's just on another spectrum that is just fine. I think some of the methods that the pups attempted did actually have some strong execution for it. I don't think the episode was as padded out as some of the others, but it still ended up being one that I just felt it was more of the same with what the show offered. And now that takes us to the subsequent episode that revolves around them building a vet room specifically for Motor. So I think it's pretty foregone what's going to happen. Motor's clearly going to have an appointment at the vet's, but she's just refusing to go. That type of storyline. But anyways, to really start things off, the pups are at Dr. Dewa's vet to get a quick checkup, and when they're done, she questions why Motor isn't present, so Rubble calls his aunt, and Motor comes into the screen and states that she doesn't want to visit. So her cousins return back to their home to try and persuade her to go to the vet, which she continues to refrain herself from. So then, like always, they're going to try various methods to get her to give in. So the first method, which I think is very innovative, where they intended an entire background that show visuals of vet materials, and they did some role playing with Motor to try and give her a sense of the vet environment, which she did enjoy, which the progression they were building turns back into a regression after they told Motor that a real vet was going to deal with her, which I guess Motor for some reason didn't really click into that notion. So now another idea from Mix, which is the Super Scroll way, because she and Motor are huge super fans who love to cosplay, so she tries to use it as a bait to essentially get Motor to drive herself to the vet. But unfortunately, Motor saw right through it as soon as she heard about the vet as part of their mission. Which, I mean, to be fair, if she did lie about the location, it could be looked at as deceptive as well. But the whole bait method didn't seem poised for success as well. And look at that, it became reality. So now for another idea, as the pups are thinking, where it is calm before the storm, where then there's some loud crashing sounds that knocks them down for some odd reason. And unsurprisingly, it's just Motor just smashing things at her play space. Which, seeing how this really suits Motor's mood, the pups know what they're thinking. They must replicate a space like this at the vet. So they call Dewa to consent with her on this new project of theirs. So they grab the materials and head over there to build, or let's just say make an exact replica of Motor's favorite play space. So after constructing all of it, they call on Crane to let her know about the new setup, which she's delightful to help Motor get there. And Motor walks in and is astonished by the play space around the vet that she can play around smashing with. So then she opens up about her nervousness to Dr. Dewa, and to calm her down, she convinces her to smash some of the blocks so that it can really ease her anxiety. And afterwards, Motor finally gets her checkup and her appointment is done. So mission impossible? Not. Operation success. So it ends. So let's talk about this episode. I kinda liked it more, but it ain't no peak, let's be real. And you know, it's just repeating those storyline with Motor, being that fussy little pup she is, refusing to do something only to then finally do it at the end, which can be predictable for the most part, but everyone knows that's the kind of storyline Motor is gonna necessitate on most given occasions. And now we are gifted with the next episode, where it's about them building an art museum. Sure, the appeal. So Gravel is passing out some pancakes to the pups, which they enjoy because pancakes are the best.
Pancakes!
the motor comes in and hands over a drawing of Gravel to him, and he hangs it on his refrigerator. And I straight up can sniff out what it was going to foreshadow. But anyways, Rubble comes rolling in and snaps some photos of them eating pancakes, which, hey, inspires her the new theme for her upcoming photography project, which is basically food eating. And now you make me hungry because of that. So meanwhile, River is skating around town and photographing anyone who's currently eating. And meanwhile, these little pups are just building a particular art museum for her photographs, where the first initial theme was food, so they tried to build a giant spaghetti. But then River calls and changes their mind of photographing a garden, so now the pups have to impromptu and rebuild the structure to theme around flowers, which why the heck does River have to add to their expense? But as River continues to take more photographs, they encounter Camilla in her vehicle and yet again has to have a change of idea. So they call back Rubble to let him and his cousins know they're going to be photographing vehicles now, which you should be theming your photographs around Builder's Cove to begin with, not like these specific things if you're going to change your mind every freaking second. So the pups are just exhausted to tear down their structure yet again. However, Charger's own voice pitches the greatest idea ever, which is replicating Gravel's fridge as part of the art museum's design. And they need more materials than what the heck they have. So this is the job for On Crane's Zoomer.
A few moments later.
Man, I'm out of breath. But anyways, Crane brings over the zoomer and helps the pups construct this giant refrigerator model as the structural design for the art museum. So next they call over River to bring them over to check out this place, and on top of that, the pups help with them basically size up the photographs so they can be more legible on display, and with River being approval of the design, so they hang those big photographs up and unsurprisingly attracts the citizens who glance at them. So the characters do their celebratory routine with one final photograph, or let's just say selfie, from River, and now it's hung up on the museum too. So that's the end. But now let's talk about this episode as a whole. It's radically fine, but I do personally think it got frustrating at points when River continued changing their mind, which led to the pups having to change their design. And it's not really anything wrong on River's end. It's more so the pups not trying to figure out a viable solution to avoid having to go back and forth like, sheesh, guys. But yeah, that's where I'm at with this episode, and let's just move on to the next one. And this one revolves around the pups creating one big Alphorn, which if you don't know is a wind instrument. So anyways, the pups and Rose are hanging out near the butterfly garden, I guess, and as Rose does some chanting, she attracts over a little goat who belongs to Zoe, who I guess cannot keep any of her animals within the farm grounds. But anyways, this goat loves singing, which, hey, she can identify herself with Rose, who also has some good singing, which you guys should host your own opera show at this point. But hey, we get to know that this little goat's name is Rosie, and the pups opt to build a nice little place inside a barn just for Rosie, and so they construct that, and she seems to settle herself inside and sings. So when the pups leave and are on their journey back, they somehow encountered Rosie's chanting around town. So they follow her around to try retrieving her, and she passes by a couple places and even goes inside the bowling alley where she makes a perfect strike. Wow, no spares. And when the pups come in, she stealthily exits the place right behind them, which, oh my goodness, pups. But they head out and search for her around the park, where they find Rosie on top of a tree. So they use their vehicles to get her down, but then I guess they didn't figure out a plan to avoid her from escaping any further, and thus essentially giving her the leeway to pounce away once again. And now she gets herself lost in a forest. What a disaster! So then Charger tries to replicate her singing and enhancing the sound by trying to use a pylon, which good intent but not effective. But hey, it inspires them the idea that they could build an instrument that is much bigger to attract Rosie, and Wheeler confirms that said instrument is an Alphorn. So they build a darn thing just out of wood, and when they're done, they get Rose to come over so she can use it to sing over Rosie, to which, hey, the good old melody is able to lead her to the pups and Rose. So they're able to guide her out of the forest and back to Zoe's farm, and she's able to once again settle herself inside of the little place they made for her, and also there's a little sound system so she can listen to singing as well. With that ends off the episode, and yet again, just another one that's fine for the most part, which I probably said that like billions of times in these kind of reviews. But yeah, the only sort of appeal is the singing, but even then, it doesn't have much weight to it in the grand scheme of the show. Like, this episode is at least action-packed, so there's not much moments that loses its steam, but it also does not elicit any sort of big notable moment that would make it stand out. So likewise, it's just on par with most of the episodes from this season. And now we get to the crew builds a skyscraper, which is also the start of the sub-series big builds, which I guess from their lens, more higher caliber builds being made alongside some upgrades for the pup side of things. So anyways, we begin with the pups and some citizens gathered at the barkyard in front of Mayor Greatway, whom announces a new big project to be made for a city, the giant Skyscraper, which the pups obviously are obligated to make, but as usual, Speedmeister has to be the one to try to create some competition with it as well. But we all know how well he does things, not particularly well. But anyways, on top of this big project that the pups are gonna do, they're also giving some upgrades. First with their outfits, where they got more cooler aesthetic with their helmets and are wearing some construction shoes, alongside a more upgraded versions of their respective vehicles with a lot more advancements implemented on it. So that's a pretty slight change. And also, during these change sequences, we're gonna have a running gag of Charger changing into the wrong outfit, which I feel like is just contrived just for the sake of having some sort of gag. In a similar vein like Marshall's Wipeouts, but sorry, this didn't really amount much to me. But now they head over to the empty lot to get to work on this big project. But also, at the same time, Seameister wants to try and pull something off his sleeve because that's what he's good at. And seeing the big trucks that the pups are operating, it gives him an idea, which is basically calling over his big brother. Wow, I can't believe it. Seameister got a family member. Anyway, you know, he comes in his big truck wearing those shades, acting really cool. But anyways, we are introduced to Speedmeister's brother, Megameister. Because his aesthetic is big that they have to call him Mega to play into that stereotype. What a way to be tropey.
What?
But obviously, it's not just him, as we're introduced to his pet, Mr. McHippo. Which you all know I'm just going to call him McHippo for short, because please. But anyways, cut back to the pups. They are getting their foundational structures set up, and then we jump forward to them getting a percentage of the building done already, which realistically wouldn't even take within a day to finish. But it's a cartoon fictional show, so it's not going to be realistic anyway. So anyways, back with the Meister brothers, they try to build their own skyscraper with a bunch of giant balls and some springs, I guess, to try and piece the building together, which all in all, I think is really dumb. But I'm not surprised coming from Speedmeister himself, and I guess that bloodline also correlates with Megameister too, being just as stupid as him. Anyways, back to the pups, and I will have to say, unfortunately for the pup side of things, there's nothing really interesting that's going on their side, with them just straightforward constructing the skyscraper with not much adversity to face, which finally on the Meister's brothers side, there's a lot more compellingness with what's going on with them, which is ironic considering I don't like them, but here we are, and I guess let's talk about them again. And Speedmeister decides to be deceptive to his brother and add extra detail on the top of the structure, which annoys Megameister well enough to storm to the top and argue with him, which on top of that, both of them stupidly pouncing on the structure, which considering how loose it was, added enough force to detach the building from the springs it was connected to, so now their build is bouncing away with them inside of it. And when the pups are ready to supply more materials for the building, that's when they witness the ordeal the brothers are in. So they put their building project aside to rescue them, because that's definitely a sequence we needed, like we've seen a billion times. So they're on pursuit, and they're able to stop the bouncing building. However, the piece that's carrying the brothers inside flies off and ends up landing on top of the carousel. Oh brother. But anyways, the pups get back to the project and put the finishing touches to it, adding the glass roofs to it, and they're done. So that's their big build, and now the skyscraper is open to the community. So the pups celebrate, and this time they actually operate their vehicles to do the wiggle and wag dance. So that's kind of a different touch to this sort of tradition, but I guess it's kind of in a way to correspond to the tone of what this sub-series is gonna entail. So yeah, I'm just okay with this episode, but I feel like what I just mentioned, the pups' storyline just felt pretty stable for the most part, not really much going on for them. While unfortunately the Meister brothers seem to have a lot more of an interesting story that was happening, which I begrudgingly have to admit that their dynamic this episode was pretty compelling. So that's where we're at with this episode. So anyways, we're jumping forward to the next episode, where this was an interesting case of the crew lifting up City Hall. Strange, right? But the episode begins with the pups at Zoe's farm. Then Wheeler's favorite pig, Truffles, just comes bolting towards him like she's a part of a stampede, and she basically almost knocks over her peppy friend for some reason, which gladly for him, his cousins save him. But anyways, Ranger Rose comes wheeling in simultaneously as a herd of bison, which are literally oxes, stampede around the town. And what she knows through her little tablet is that the route this herd is gonna go is through the forest before hitting town, where of all places, the City Hall is the place that is basically holding up their traffic, and since they have no wariness, they're just gonna barge through the building, which that is not good. But also, who the hell is responsible for not even trying to prevent them from hitting the town? Like, Builder's Cove seriously is the most susceptible town to any of these kind of incidents. So then we move on to town where they've already made it there, which how could you let them beat you, pups? But they approach Carl's Pizza Parlor with some familiar customers there. Where in brief, the crew make it there in time to lift up the pizza parlor as the herds are passing by. And then next thing, as the herd reaches a roundabout where they circulate around it, the pups like trap them in it with construction beams, which why are you choosing that? It's not going to be strong enough. But anyways, the idea what they could do to avoid an inevitable destruction of the core building of town, they could just lift it up. Like, no kidding. So they now change into their big build uniforms, and let's just cut to the chase. Not the police dog, obviously, but the situation here. And they begin using their big vehicles to lift it up, which during the process, the bison break through the beam barriers and conveniently continue on the route towards the city hall. And so there's not much more time to waste, because these bisons are like racers on Amazing Race who have no time to stall. So the pups continue levitating the city hall building up, and it has enough of the height for the bison to pass under. So mission complete. But also to nitpick here, why the heck was Mayor Greatway inside the building while the pups were lifting it? Like, I know it's your place, but Christ, ma'am, you expose yourself to this highly intense operation where one wrong move and you're not going to be coming out of that building unfettered. But anyways, as the pups are ready to lower down the building, Rose stops them after she spots a bison who has their leg wedged in between some rocks, which how did not one of you guys check before you started lifting the thing down? Like, oh, the indignity. But furthermore, with all 4 pups required to operate the vehicles to keep the building up, their hands are essentially occupied, leaving it down to Rose to deal with it, which she removes the rocks with ease so that little bison can now join its herd. So then the pups finally lower the city hall back down to its surface, and then as they celebrate their success, there's one last rumbling, which is Truffles again. And this time Wheeler's not so lucky as she knocks him down like some bowling pin, and everyone is amused by it. So now to wrap things up with my thoughts on the episode, it's just by the numbers, which I'll give it to them for trying to make it suspenseful. And you know what, it was something to add the twist with the trapped bison after the pups just succeeded with their operation. But then again, I feel it was just there to pad out the episode, as the sequence didn't take that long to get over with. So then that takes us to the following episode titled The Crew Builds a Rotating Restaurant, which in the year of 2025, we're following trends of building restaurants in the sky, which hopefully these pups are able to build one that's stable and is not completed ahead of schedule. But anyways, we start off with Lucas and Lily bring their parents for a surprise pizza meal for their anniversary, which alongside them, the pups are there as well, sitting on their own table, as well as the Meister brothers, which who invited them? But when things are just about to start, climate change. So the idea, once again, thanks to Charter, which is adding on another layer to the already built skyscraper that facilitates a restaurant. So they get into their big build gear and construct this extra part add on top of the skyscraper, and to finish it off with a little pulley system they've enforced to lift that compartment to the top. The operation was a success, and I'm surprised that little tip that it was placed on is able to keep it holding. So then the pups invite that family to check it out with them, and once they reach the top, they get a pretty glorious view of the dawn and clouds, considering the height of the skyscraper somehow surpassed the cloud level, which means you're telling me this is higher than the Burj Khalifa. But anyways, as they explore around, some more citizens joins them, and then as Omar and Juniper is about to settle themselves on a special table, looks like the Meister brothers has already reserved it, despite the pups pointing out that that specific table was for the family so they can enjoy the anniversary alongside the sight of the fireworks. But the brothers just don't give a crap because they are very spiteful. And on top of that, Mega Meister in particular stacked all the tables and chairs together to create a mountain and have him and his brother sit on top of it like they are the king of the castle, which if they ever made one, it would just come crashing down right away. So with the anniversary essentially in ruins, a solution has come up that they could just easily have the restaurant do a rotation, which duh, it's actually way cooler with that kind of technology. So they need to do some reworking, and now that restaurant can rotate circularly, and at night, fireworks come blasting out in honor of Juniper and Omar's anniversary, which they sit on their table alone to enjoy the sighting. And of course, we had to get a little follow-up to what happened with the Meister brothers, where the consequence of this restaurant rotation is that they end up on the side where there's no fireworks happening, which instead of sulking about it, get your butts off the mountain table you made and just walk towards the freaking side that has the fireworks in sight. Instead, you Tweedledums just waste that opportunity bickering with each other, and the fact that their animal pets are clever enough to get their butts off the seat to check out the fireworks with the pups shows they have a lot more of the common sense than the Meister brothers combined, which at this point don't even be their pets. Join the pup side. But anyways, talking about this episode, I think it's just middle of the road. Nothing new to really gauge off of this. And I just reckon despite how much they try to hype up this big build sort of thing, because I guess the high caliber construction they're doing, it's just not having much weight to it. And as a whole, throughout this sub-series so far, I've just been whelmed. But hey, that's just my thoughts mid-series. Maybe it can pick up in the back third. Now that gets us to the episode where the crew builds a giant tunnel, not a regular tunnel like the one back in season 1. So the crew and Rose are just hanging out in the forest. And then Charter races around and he encounters a giant meteor that crashed. And so because it is very special, they decide they're gonna take it and get it to the science center. So while they leave to get their big build vehicles, the Meister brothers had already discovered it as well and settled themselves on top of it, trying to have some tea party on it. Like what? But basically they want it for themselves. So then we have the pups change into their big build gear and drive their way back to the spot where the meteor's at. And meanwhile, the Meister brothers are trying to move it despite how heavy it is, which no kidding. But they are able to slide a material underneath to try lifting it out. And Speedmeister in his vehicle gives too much force on the other end, which obviously launches the meteor like it was on a seesaw. And then it starts rolling away because these guys don't know how to just understand the physics.
God, you look stupid.
So then it rolls by the pups who have just arrived, so they U-turn to pursue it, and they get ahead of it somehow and encounter a little hole in the surface, which they easily piece together that they can widen it enough to try catching the meteor into. And though the whiff wasn't that bad, it was just the execution didn't go right, where the meteor just rolled in and out of it and continued going further towards the edge of the cliff. Mix then jumps in to save it from the inevitable, and she uses her mixer to squirt at the meteor to not only shoot it back but also land it inside the hole that they made. With that ordeal finding its closure, the pups now speculate their next steps, as the main road is not very suitable for a big meteor like this. So their prompt is to create a giant tunnel. So while they finalize their plans, they were being eavesdropped by the Meister brothers, who now try to conceive a plan to mess around with the pups' upcoming project. Oh my gosh, brothers. But anyways, the crew moves the meteor out of its hole and they start digging within it to create the portal for the giant tunnel. And then they're like a percentage into the process, excavating the dirt and soil to expand the tunnel. And finally, they've reached the correct spot to build the exiting portal for the tunnel. And we obviously have to have this dramatic visual of all the pups springing out of the tunnel hole that exits to the town. So then they head back to the other end to collect what appears to be the lining segment. So there is a concrete foundation around the tunnel. So meanwhile, while they're occupied with that process, the Meister brothers have already made their way into the giant tunnel, where they have stationed themselves in an unfinished section. So this is their opportunity to sabotage the pups, where first they blow up a giant balloon to resemble the meteor, and then when the pups are approaching, they just use a bunch of metallical parts and boulders to block up the way. And the pups arrive for this shocking discovery, which leads to the questioning of who the culprit could be. Like, who do you think, after the many times you've been through something like this before? Guess what? They find out their answers through the Meister brothers' laughs, exposing them as the culprits. But then after boasting about their achievement, their giant balloon begins to deflate, and its size is big enough to thrust and carry the Meister brothers out of the cave and continue deflating while in the air, with a lot of people just witnessing, expressing such perplexity. But back with the pups, they find a way to get through this blockage by using the weight of the meteor, which they had to head back the other way to grab it and roll it down so it can crash through the obstructed path. So now they can continue finishing the final framework around the tunnel section, and they complete their project as they roll the meteor out to show it off to all the citizens. However, now there's another big problem. The size of this meteor was too enormous to fit into the museum, which why did no one do some measurements before planning this out? So for plan B, they just built a giant arch and placed the meteor on top of it. And furthermore, in honor of Charger being the first to discover it, it's going to be named after him, much to his excitement. So after this celebratory moment, we of course needed to know what the hell happened to the Meister brothers after that balloon ordeal, and Speedmeister calls the pups to let them know where they're at, which is on top of the spire of the city halls. So the pups are on their way to rescue them, which why leave them up there? They just tried to sabotage your plans. But who cares, that's the end of the episode. And it just left me whelmed, because the story plot was pretty middling. Just another repeated sort of storyline with the Meisters trying to interfere with the pups' plans, only to flop like a pancake that misses the pan and plummets onto the dirty floor. So for me, the episode is just another one that is not very noteworthy and felt very padded out, so I don't hold it much to any high regards. Okay, jumping forward to the crew building a mega stunt ramp. So we have the pup looking at a book about motorcycle stunts, and they come across a page that resembles Great Way, which is actually her grandma. So there you go, a family tree right there. But basically, Great Way herself idolized her Nana with her motorcycle skills. But then next time they are being eavesdropped by the Meister brothers, which with Mega Meister in particular challenging Great Way. So first and foremost, the puppies are gonna build a giant stunt ramp so they can get this competition in effect. So while they build foundation structure for the ramp, Speedmeister in particular offers up an idea for the competitors to jump over the entire ballpark. Which cool, I guess. Probably one of the only good ideas this guy could even consider. But yeah, well, it's a pretty high caliber sort of stunt that needs much more advanced structuring. And since the pups with their regular vehicles are not going to do that with this sort of ramp, they're going to do a switcheroo with their big build vehicles because that's what this sub-series is. So they change into those gears and head back to the stadium to build a much bigger ramp, while the Meister brothers are just observing because that's their greatest hobby ever of doing absolutely nothing right. And with Mega Meister even questioning his ability to pull off the stunt, his brother suggests him that he can just cheat, which stop! When the pups finally finish building the Mega ramps, Mega Meister himself operates his vehicle to use it, and once he accelerates off the ramp, his brother is in his own vehicle flying and hooks onto his vehicle so he can cheat while also doing some triple flips, which everyone looking up noticed that the brothers are cheating, which is not fair, which like, no kidding, why didn't you enforce some sort of rules against this earlier? But then things go wrong as Speedmaster loses control of his vehicle and the Meister brothers begin to plummet to the surface, which that's the kind of stereotype with the Meister brothers where everything goes wrong for them. Anyways, the pups rescue them, and on top of that, they have another job of fixing the position of the ramp because while the brothers were going haywire, they accidentally knocked into one of the ramps which lost its positioning to line up with the other one. So we just see this pretty short sequence of them just repositioning, which is just boring. But anyways, Mayor Great Way does her stunt where she rolls off the ramp on her motorcycle and does a triple flip. So she comes out as a success and everyone cheers as well as the Meister brothers. And she's very delightful with the pups' help to not only get her to do this amazing stunt but also honor her grandmother too. So anyways, that is the end, and once again another mid-episode, just kind of playing off the typical average episode of the Meister brothers trying to interfere only to mess it up. Like, it was a pretty foregone conclusion what's going to happen, and also I just think it's another case where the episode doesn't really hold much weight to it as time goes on. But likewise, we now move on to the final episode, which thank God, but also this season was a lot shorter than its previous counterparts, but you know what, who cares? So this episode is about them building a solar farm. Okay, we were treading similar storyline to the solar bus episode. So it starts off with the pups setting up the concert inside the ballpark for Sierra Sparkle, which then Rubble gets a call from her where she announces that she wrote a song specifically for her father, Gabrielle, which he happens to come out of his store, which is like, if you want to surprise him, I would stay farther away from the store so he doesn't overhear anything. But Sierra basically masks her surprise by just gleaning in on her excitement about her concert, which her father gives some really comforting words and expressing his excitement to go to her concert, which, oh, about that. But anyways, Sierra boards her tour bus and is making her way. So then the pups power up the concert, but somehow the battery was drained within seconds and not only just lost its power in the stadium, it also lost the power in the entire town for some reason. Which, no offense to the pups, I know they're successful in a lot of what they build, but come on, this was some incompetence on their end. But yeah, all electricity has been shut off, including Gabriel's shop, which for some reason while the power is cut, he goes back into his shop, which is all slippery and stuff, and then he slips and hurts his foot, which I think him even choosing to go into the store during a power cut is really dumb, and now he faces the consequences for that questionable choice. So anyways, back with the pups where they need to resolve the mistake that they caused, and with the site of the tour bus still functioning because it was powered up by the solar panels, with this show trying to be a bit meta, they decided to advance from that and create a solar farm so it can be able to power up all electricity around town. And they find a perfect spot to place them at, the Sky Tower, which works to their convenience because it's high, and likewise because it's a higher caliber operation, they have to be in their big build gear. And so they operate their big vehicles to the tower so they can build a foundation structure around it to place the panels on each side, which these panels were really clumped together on their respective sides. So once the pups turn it on, its solar power is able to restore the electricity back around town. So then it's time for Sierra's concert with most of the citizens in attendance. And when she's about to sing a song for her dad, she noticed that her dad is not anywhere in sight. Which what a great time that he calls the pups to let them know that he's unable to attend because he fell and hurt his foot when he went inside. He was like, no kidding! If you didn't even go inside at all, you wouldn't even be in this pickle. So that aspect is disappointing for Sierra's sake. However, the pups are able to find a solution out of this. We're inspired by one of the big screens. They decide that they can make an advancement of using one of the Skyscraper solar panels to basically broadcast a large screening of Sierra's concert, which she spots at and is amazed. So now her father gets to watch the concert as he sits outside to rest his broken foot, and she finally performs her song and sings the one that is in honor for her father. So that ends off the episode there, and before I talk about my final thoughts on this finale, I might as well point out a goof here where the giant panel screen was, I guess, trying to match with the angle of her looking at it like a mirror. However, she's looking up towards it because it's located high on the skyscraper. However, the screen failed to match the angle and made it seem like she's looking straight at it from a close-up shot instead of the bird's eye angle that it should have been, as if the screen broadcast is reflecting how she's looking at it, its angle viewing her should have been from a far bird's eye view perspective, which is an animation mistake that I did notice. But to sum my personal thoughts with the episode, it's again mid, but definitely did get a bit frustrating from the Gabrielle side of things. Like, no offense to his character, I think he's a great father, but in terms on his specific role on this episode, he just came off extremely dim-witted with the astronomically dumb decision he made to sprint back into his store in complete pitch black, which all the produce started melting and making the floor slippery, which if I were Gabrielle, I wouldn't even go in, especially when the power cut during broad daylight. Like, you have enough sunlight to brighten up the atmosphere around you. But even then, the story plot itself, yet again, doesn't really stick or offer up any sort of resonance with me, so that encapsulates everything I've got to say for this episode and the final one for season 3. So that is my review, and likewise, as a tradition, I'm gonna rate the best and worst episode. So starting with the best, it was a rough choice as all these episodes are not that dissimilar to each other in terms of quality and simplistic story plots. So I decided to select the hotel elevator episode because I personally felt that it was more memorable. But it ain't to the level of like perfection in that light. But it is an episode that I was largely exhilarated with. So yeah, I ended up picking this. Even though this episode is radically flawed in a lot of ways. But I did find myself more riveted than most given episodes from this season. And now for the worst episode. This was more tougher for me. And not like to the level where I don't think any of the episodes are bad. It's to the level where I think most of them are on the same. Just being so middling, bland, and otherwise unnotable. Like if I were to just break out of my criterion and pick a plethora of them, I will. However, I ain't no rule breaker. So let's go straight to the point. I have chosen the Mega Stunt Ramp episode, which is a part of the Big Build series. And yeah, like I mentioned, very mid. And honestly, I was close to picking the Big Tunnel episode, but I think because it was a tad more better with some of its suspense, and at least kept it above this one where I just didn't care and knew what was going to happen because it was such a foregone conclusion that made things pretty dull, even with some of the climax or conflict with the Meister brothers attempting to cheat and other sorts. It felt like just repeated material where it was so predictable that they were just gonna flop at their attempts. So honestly, my rationale for selecting this episode is that it's mid and also unnotable. So yeah. And this wraps it up for me. So for my final thoughts, season is probably a tad better, but not to any higher highs that makes it to any sort of pinnacle. But I'll give props to the show for at least trying to take the story plot to an extreme with the Big Builds episode, which was only hyped up because execution-wise, it was most of the same with any given independent episode. And overall, the storylines were just so limited and lacked the inroads to elicit any complexity. Overall, although this season tried, it still ended up being more of the same of its repetitive quality like the last two seasons, and my experience just continues to go down that I just feel so checked out at this point. But that's not going to discourage me from continuing to cover it on my channel, because why not? I have more fun making my critical reviews on these modern kids shows. So yeah, there's my thoughts on season 3. Tap that like and subscribe as I'm going to continue making my coverage on animated media for my channel. So with that said, I appreciate you all tuning in.